Dear Lisbon, dear hosts, thank you very much for the gracious invitation to this prestigious conference. I'm flattered, humbled, and honored. So, my presentation is named after this session, Are We All Pirates? Yes. What's that? I have another 20 minutes. Well, okay. Let's see what slides we got. So, my name is Falkvinge. I am Falkvinge on Twitter. If you're hearing me say something funny, something stupid, or something just worth quoting, I love seeing my name on Twitter. Feel free to quote me all through this presentation. So, a brief introduction. How many in here have heard of the Swedish Pirate Party before? Let's see a show of hands. I'd say that's about half, which, funnily enough, is so consistent wherever I present in the world, whether it's in San Francisco, in Australia, that I put it in the slides. It's always 1/2 to 2/3. And then just for kicks, let's see how many in here have heard of any other Swedish political party? Yeah. Scattered hands throughout the audience, maybe a half dozen. Yeah, scattered hands. Isn't that kind of funny? Doesn't that tell you something about the very interesting things going on right now? So I founded the first Pirate Party in January 1st, 2006, and we've since spread to about 70 countries, for which a couple of people have pinned awards on me, like the Foreign Policy magazine have named me one of the top 100 global thinkers. Time magazine shortlisted me as one of the world's 100 most influential people, and so on and so forth. While that's obviously honorable and flattering, I don't think it's entirely fair, because this is a grassroots movement. This is a generation of new values. You'll notice that these slides are branded European Pirate Academy. That's just our public speaking branch. I'm associated with the Pirate Party and its founding. So, are we all pirates? Today's entertainment is going to be a bit about general principles, about industrial protectionism, the observation that justice is becoming two-tiered, a bit of perspectives on what's going on, the observations that artists have a really bright future, a brief introduction to a reform proposal, which is outlined in this book, which I'm giving away copies of if anybody wants it later, and some conclusions. So, general principles here. Why do people share? Why is it in our genes to share culture and knowledge? Why do we feel good doing that? Why is it in our heritage to share? I'd like to go back a bit. I'd like to remind everybody what it was like when our parents communicated in writing and sent letters in the mail. As in actually taking out paper and a pen and writing stuff on a piece of paper, folding that paper, putting it in an envelope, writing an address on the outside of the envelope, affixing a stamp to it, and carrying this by hand to a mailbox and putting it there. People actually did that. That letter had certain civil liberties associated with it, and they were very important. The letter was anonymous. You, and you alone, decided whether to identify yourself as sender of this letter, whether you did so on the inside of the letter for only the recipient to know, on the outside of the envelope for the world to know, or frankly, not at all. Or you could write a bogus name, somebody else's name. That was your prerogative. You and you alone decided whether to do this, and this was your right. The letter is secret in transit. Nobody would dare suggest a law that all letters would be steamed open just to see if they contained a copied joke or a copied drawing. Arguably, some people under previous suspicion of a very serious crime can get their letters opened. but no letter is ever opened to see if it contains something copied. It is untracked. Nobody had the means, the capability, or the rights to see who is communicating with whom. And obviously, the mailman is never, ever responsible for the contents of a letter. Unthinkable. The internet has become a lawless Wild West, and we find that very concerning. It is absolutely reasonable that our children have the same rights as our parents did in the environment that they communicate in. That demand is absolutely reasonable, that their communication is also anonymous, secret, untracked, and that the mailmen are never responsible. But when you say this, the copyright industry stands up and says, "You cannot be serious. If you allow these civil liberties to carry over into the internet, we cannot make money." And I say, so what? We never, ever determined civil liberties based on who gets to profit and who doesn't. Civil liberties stand much, much higher in our society than that. Much higher. It's entirely reasonable to demand that our children can communicate with the same set of civil liberties that our parents fought, bled, and died to give them. An entrepreneur's role in society is to make money given the current constraints of society and technology. They do not ever get to dismantle civil liberties, even if they can't make money otherwise. So let's talk a bit about industrial protectionism. There are a set of laws that are created to prevent disruption and save obsolete jobs, in preventing market forces, in preventing development of markets, and preventing innovation. These industrial protectionist laws, or IP laws, can be seen as an example of patent monopoly laws, copyright monopoly laws, and so on and so forth. Let me take a couple of examples of these anti-market and, as we've seen, anti-liberty laws. You'll hear some people describe this as property, these monopoly constructs as property. Nothing could be more wrong. That is just a deceptive, dishonest moniker intended to give the wrong perspective. Let me give an example. When I buy a chair from any furniture store, that is one of many copies made from an identical drawing at a plant from a master blueprint. It is one of many copies, but this one is mine. I have the receipt in hand. This is my property. With this property, I can do a number of things that are normal for property. I can take it apart and look at how it's built. I can use the pieces for a new project that I sell if I like. I can put it out on the porch for neighbors to use and charge them for it if they're stupid enough to pay me for that. I can invite people to use it in my home. I can make copies of this chair and sell it, provided it is not patented. But the invention of a chair is fortunately older than 20 years. So there's prior art. Compare this with when I buy a movie on a DVD. Same thing applies. I buy this copy of an object that is produced in a plant from a master blueprint. I have the receipt in hand. This is my property in all its aspects. Property in all its aspects. Despite this, there are a number of things that I cannot do with my own property. I cannot use it on the porch and charge neighbors to use it with me. I cannot deconstruct it and use parts of it for new projects, and I cannot make copies. There is a monopoly construct called the copyright monopoly that limits my property rights to what I have legitimately bought. If you hear lawyers, copyright monopoly lawyers discuss this contract, you'll hear that they never use the word property. They use the term exclusive rights. We hold the term exclusive rights to blah, blah, blah. In everyday speak, there's this monopoly. Monopoly rights that, as I've said, limit property rights. This is extremely important for the following discussion. And that does not inherently mean that these monopolies are bad. It just means that you cannot say that property rights are good, therefore copyright monopoly is good. You'll end up in the opposite conclusion. There might be utilitarian reasons to have this anti-market, anti-property, anti-creativity construct, and we'll be returning to that. Anti-market, anti-business, anti-creativity. What it does is serve legacy distribution channels and at the same time hurting artists severely. A new generation of artists is damaged very much by these constructs. There's a two-tiered justice forming. Let me take an example where some are more equal than others. If you look at a typical terms of service for a website, you could see that in one section, you would have that you agree to respect the copyright monopoly rights of everybody and not upload anything that would violate blah, 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 blah. And you also agree that this copyright monopoly construct is essential to the foundation of our civilization, and if you should disrespect it, then civilization as we know it will end. There will be rain of fire, locusts, barbarian invasion, doomsday, and so on and so forth. And then the immediately following section, and I'm not exaggerating here, I've only translated a bunch of terms of service into ordinary language. In the immediately following section, you'll typically see that, oh, and any creative work you do while using our service, or think about our service, or possibly have our service installed, is ours to use for all eternity. It's easy to observe here that people are getting mixed messages. And there's, to give you one example, the Vodler video on demand service was adamant about Hollywood's right to their copyright monopoly on their movies, while at the same time constructing their entire service on code that was under the GPL construct. Therefore, committing a monopoly violation, a copyright monopoly violation themselves, constructed the entire service while paying homage to the importance of the copyright monopoly, but only as it applied to Hollywood. There's a two-tier justice here. The trial against the Pirate Bay is another example, where people said that rule of law is tremendously important, while at the same time, the lead investigator with the police was hired by Warner Brothers, one of the plaintiffs, while doing the investigation. While this investigation was being finished, the police investigator was on the payroll for one of the plaintiffs. The judge was socializing with the plaintiffs and was even on the board for an organization advocating harsher punishment for copyright monopoly violations. And people are seeing this. The message is, do as we say, don't do as we do. People are seeing this, and they're having none of it, which is why you were seeing last year protests in all of Europe against ACTA, an unprecedented, synchronized protest in 200 European cities. It just blew the politicians away. They had never seen anything like it. The Pirate Party became the largest party in Sweden in the sub-30 demographic, as we heard. Imagine that. Think about that for a while. The idea that the opposition to these monopolies and the importance of freedom of speech in opposition to these legacy industries was the most important issue in all of society. It was more important than healthcare, than schools, than energy policy, than defense, than unemployment benefits, than the economy. Opposition to the copyright monopoly and its unfair, harsh enforcement was more important to the net generation than anything else. And that tells you a bit about where things are going. For perspectives, let's take a look at red flags. In the UK, when the automobile was invented, obviously it wasn't called the automobile, it was called something else, people were afraid of new inventions. And in particular, some people exploited this because it wasn't only people that were afraid, it was also animals that were afraid. So there's something called a Red Flag Act of 1865, which mandated that every car must have 3 crew: a driver, a stoker, essentially a machinist, and a man walking in front of the car waving a red flag. Looked like this. And this drawing was made in the mid-1800s, so I think it's just out of copyright. What we observe here is that this law forced the car to be used to safely and slowly transport people and cargo to the stagecoach and railroad stations. And not surprisingly, this law was lobbied for by those same industries who pretended to embrace the new technology, but behind the scenes do anything you can to prevent it from reaching its full potential. Prevent the new technology from displacing our business and displacing our head of the field. We can see this easily today, how the copyright industry is saying, we have nothing against the internet, while at the same time trying to kill it. This is an absolute carbon copy of what the stagecoach and railroad industries did to the car. And as a result, the German car industry got a head start over Britain's, a head start that it still enjoys 200 years later, or 150 years later. So once this kind of mass collective psychosis sets in that we need this kind of law, people will go to no end to outdo themselves in implementing it. It becomes a race to the bottom. And in Pennsylvania, to give one example, the Red Flag Act there, enacted in 1896, said that any driver of a car that sees horses or cows, cattle or equestrian, up on the road must immediately take 3 actions, immediately. The driver must, A, stop the car, B, disassemble the car, and C, hide all the parts in the nearest shrubbery. This law passed both legislative chambers in Pennsylvania unanimously. That's illustrative of how much a mass psychosis can set in once industries lobby against an idea like this. It didn't become law because it was vetoed by the governor, but that gives you a perspective. So is there a right to make money? Of course there isn't. Take a look at when households were electrified, early 1920s. The largest industry in pretty much every city had been the ice-making industry. People who had sawed up ice from lakes in winter, stored these large blocks of ice on sawdust in barns, and then carried them to households who can use ice, the cold from ice, to keep perishable food around for longer. Then came electric refrigerators, and the entire industry was wiped out in a couple of years. The largest industry in most European cities. And yet, nobody suggested a refrigerator tax of 3,000 euros that would go to the Ice Makers Union. Technology has always changed business models, always will. If you look at just a sample of what the copyright industry's enemies have been through the years, there's been this cry of the sky is falling every 5 to 10 years, starting with a self-playing piano and the gramophone, which will be the end of a vivid, songful humanity. End quote. And going on and on and on. Television would be the end of movies because who would possibly pay to see a movie in the cinema if you could see it for free at home? Then 10 years later, cable television was absolutely unfair competition because we had to charge for movies compared to those who could see it for free. This goes on and on and on. Oh, and on. And today the internet is the large enemy, and some are even suggesting that people sharing knowledge and culture for free is what funds terrorism. I mean, it goes... They will go to no extent to try so fear, uncertainty, and debt. Artists, on the other hand, have a bright future. Since people started sharing knowledge and culture with each other, the income for artists have risen 114%, according to a Norwegian study, musicians. We see similar numbers from Sweden and the UK. Now, so artists do not have a problem. This is tremendously important. Artists do not have a problem. The ones who have a problem are obsolete, parasitic middlemen, distributors. And they are not the same thing. Tremendously important. They are not the same thing. You do not get to legislate a place in the value chain. No entrepreneur has that privilege. That is anti-market. Creativity, on the other hand, is more profitable than ever. So I'm going to briefly gloss over a reform proposal, which is in 5 steps: allowing file sharing, reducing the monopoly to commercial use only, reducing the length of this monopoly to a more reasonable 20 years, allowing remixes and samples, which today are illegal, killing all tremendously unfair blank media levies, and criminalizing digital restriction management, because you don't get to sell something which is locked and then keep the key, and other types of fraud. And so this is the reform proposal in a nutshell. It is gaining steam. Notably, moral rights would be unchanged. It is gaining steam across the European Parliament and elsewhere. And I'd argue that this is politically closer than you might think. While enforcement of these monopolies and harsher enforcement is still having a political majority, that majority is now razor thin. I predict we'll see something like this reform proposal happen in the next 10 or possibly stretch 15 years. And I predict that in the next few years, we will see criticism of people sharing culture and knowledge become politically impossible. Sharing is a good thing. This reform solves the worst problem. It's doable tomorrow, and I'd argue that's the last chance for the copyright monopoly to survive at all, because if it's not reformed now, the next generation will strike it out completely. They'll just kill it, and they will do so to thunderous applause. So are we all pirates? Yes. Some people like to frame this as an economic battle between industries. A content industry, which is not about content at all, it is about distribution. Some people like to call them the creative industry, but when you look at it, the only thing that they have been created with happens to be accounting. But it's not about that. It is about a legacy, obsolete industry against the people. 250 million Europeans share culture and knowledge in violation of today's monopoly laws. They do so because it's a good thing to share. It is good for society, it is good for the artists, it is good for us as a civilization, because sharing culture, sharing knowledge is what has always built civilization. Put another word, it's not just 250 million Europeans, it's also 250 million votes. And politicians are increasingly becoming aware of this. We are making them aware of this, as you saw in the map of protests across Europe. If you're not taking the time to understand what you're doing to the internet and the perspective of the next generation, we are going to kick you out of office. That is one of few messages that politicians understand. And these 250 million people will not grow up. They will not stop sharing. They will not start thinking that monopolies or the do as we say, not do as we do attitude will become okay. They are keeping this attitude. And they are the next generation of European legislators. So think about that for a minute. In summary, there's more creativity than ever. More creativity than ever. There are more fans than ever, fueling this creativity with money, love, and passion. Artists are making more money than ever. There are less people than ever respecting obsolete industries and their monopolies. And all of these are good things. All good things. The future is bright. Thank you.